There are some things we know without thinking about storms. For instance, we can see that a storm, when it comes in, refreshes the area. It removes dead limbs from trees. It revitalizes organic systems. And it provides a shock to nature, allowing all of the creatures that are impacted by the storm to go through whatever processes are required for their further perfection. This much we can understand. But what about interior storms? What about those moments where we are literally rocked by waves of fear, winds of anxiety? You get the point. Where we feel overcome by an oncoming oppressive system of some kind or another. To what end these kind of storms? We also know that all things pass, and that storms, by their very nature, both in the physical world and psychologically, they will pass. But I don't think it's enough to know that a storm will just pass, so that we become individuals who kind of hunker down and hope that eventually whatever it is that's turning everything upside down will right itself. I think that it's important that we discover the purpose of storms in our lives, which is the reason for this blog that I'm doing here with this video. When a storm takes place in nature, it's because opposing pressure systems meet. High pressure meets low pressure, basically. And when they encounter each other, the two opposing forces go through a process by which ultimately they're harmonized, they're modified, they're brought into a balance by that which helps them reach this state of equanimity, whatever that may be. And we can see this is so. We would say the storm has spent its energy, but in truth, the energy spent in a storm is part of the continual process by which new things are brought into existence, new possibilities. I would urge you to understand the same thing about interior storms, that they have a purpose. That when one opposing force meets another, for instance, what I want meets what I don't want, how I want to feel meets something inside of me that doesn't feel that way at all. You fill in the blanks. You and I both know that it's a form of abuse, tyranny, really, for any interior state to dictate to us who we are and how we should feel, let alone what we should do. And yet when we're in the grip of these negative states, that's exactly what happens to us. The storm, whatever its nature, more or less tells us who our self is and what we should do. So let me suggest a couple things to you. First, and I trust that you've come this far in your spiritual work to understand. Number one, it's very evident, or at least it should be, that resisting these interior storms is a complete waste of time. Struggling, hating, wishing at all costs that somehow or other you weren't feeling the way you do does absolutely nothing to change how you feel. In fact, if anything, what it does is it cements it. Resistance is a kind of coalescing factor. It creates the thing we don't want. So not wanting the storm doesn't do anything. On the other side, we also know that when we identify with these negative states, when we more or less agree that we feel anxious, we feel worried, that we're full of fear, in other words, we become one with whatever that negative state is, we know that's absolutely useless too. So here we have a very important picture, if I've painted it properly, and that is number one, that there's no point in fighting with the storm, hating the conditions that we blame our pain on, and identifying with this pain part of ourself, finding a sense of self in that suffering is equally useless. So if it's not this and it's not that that we do in the moment where we're confronted with some dark storm, what are we left with to do? This is the point. What we are left with in such moments is to do nothing. Now don't reject the idea. Let me explain. When in nature these opposing forces collide, they collide for a purpose greater than either one of the forces can possibly comprehend. And these forces are acted on by a body that is greater than either of them in order to bring about the balance in themselves, to use the force in each of them to create something new. It's exactly the same way when it comes to these interior storms that you and I go through. In the onset of some unwanted state, instead of allowing the attention to be drawn to something outside of us, where we blame the way we feel on some person or condition, and subsequently refusing to agree to identify with this poor me or this unwanted state of myself, to remain with understanding what it means to be the whole of the storm. The whole of the storm. I'm not the condition, and I'm not the consciousness that feels oppressed by it. Instead, I bring myself into the present moment and I remain aware of all of the elements that are taking place at once. I'm aware of what my mind wants to blame outside of me. I'm aware of the self within me that's sure it's suffering as it is because of that condition. And I give my attention to neither of these states, to these projections, but rather to the whole of the moment, the whole of the self in its exterior consideration and in its interior manifestation. And I tell you that if you do this, you will not only see the storm pass, but you will also understand that when you did what we've just described, that it produced something within you that you could have never known in any other way. And that is simply this, that you within you is the ground of something that never passes and that cannot be set upon by negative states. It is to these stormy thoughts and feelings and the conditions that we blame them upon, as is the very sky through which the dark clouds, the thunder, and the rain fly. Do this small work. Start understanding the absolute futility of fighting with storms, and instead of fighting with them, pay attention to the whole of the process of themselves within you, and you will find freedom of a completely different kind.